So in Chapter 6, it talks about the purpose of criminal punishment and asks two questions. Does society have the right to punish, and is infliction of punishment morally justifiable? Rules about punishment, including how punishment can be inflicted and for what kind of behavior, are contained in laws and regulations and justifies punishment. The moral justification for punishment is a separate issue from the legal justification because of society's moral justification for punishment that still has to be established. Some philosophers argue that it is morally impermissible for the state to punish people for breaking the law, despite general acceptance of the notion that if the state prohibits some forms of conduct, it should have the right to punish those who perform it. Some of the theories that have been developed to morally justify society's infliction of punishment include the theories of deterrence, retribution, rehabilitation, incapacitation, and restorative justice. The three perspectives about the issue of punishment is the philosophical, sociological, and criminological perspective, and each represent a different and distinct way of looking at the issue of punishment. We use the word punishment to describe anything we think is painful. We also use the word punishment in the context of parents disciplining their children. In this chapter, punishment in the sense of a sanction imposed for a criminal offense consists of 5 elements. Punishment must involve an unpleasantness to the victim. Punishment must be for an offense. Punishment must be of an offender. Punishment must be the work of personal agencies. Punishment must not be the natural consequence of an action. And if this is not the case, then the act is not one of the punishment, but is a hostile act. Direct action by a person who has no special authority is not properly called punishment, and is more likely to be revenge or a hostile act. The unpleasantness should be an essential part of punishment, and that the punishment should also reflect attitudes of resentment and indignation and judgments of disapproval and reprobation on the part of punishing authority himself or of those in whose name the punishment is inflicted. Punishment is a legal process whereby violators of criminal law are condemned and sanctioned in accordance with specified legal categories and procedures. This chapter examines the major arguments relating to punishment and illustrates the ways in which those arguments relate to justice and the justice system, as well as examining how the system would be affected should one argument prevail over another. When we ask the question, why should offenders be punished, some people argue that offenders should be punished because punishment will stop them from committing further crimes. Punishment tells victims that society disapproves of the harm that they have suffered. It also discourages others from doing the same thing. Punishment protects society from dangerous or dishonest people. Punishment allows offenders to make amends for the harm they have caused, and it also ensures that people understand that laws are there to be obeyed. The concept of punishment has been theorized by moral philosophers, social theorists, and criminologists. Punishment is a complex concept and an approach to punishment that is limited to a reading of moral philosophy that fails to represent the full dimension and complexity of the subject. Some philosophers believe that punishment is important and leads to a set of questions. These questions include: what should be the goals of punishment? What should be the values contained in and promoted by the criminal law? And what is the purpose of punishment? There are 2 main types of theories of punishment, which include the utilitarian theory and the retributive theory. Deterrence is the theory that sets the goal of punishment as the prevention of future crime, which usually refers to as utilitarian because they are derived from utilitarian philosophy. Retributivists focus on the past actions of the offender because they seek retribution from offenders for their crimes. Retributivist conception of punishment include the notion that the purpose of punishment is to allocate moral blame to offenders for the crimes and that their future conduct is not a proper concern for deciding punishment. People are deterred from actions when they refrain from carrying them out because they experience an aversion to the possible consequences of those actions. It is hard to determine whether the kind of penalty or its severity has any effect on whether a particular penalty is successful. Utilitarians believe that punishment can be justified only if the harm that it prevents is greater than the harm inflicted on the offender through punishing him or her. Unless the punishment deters from further crime, it simply adds to the totality of human suffering. Utilitarians believe justifying punishment by referring to its beneficial effects or consequences. Utilitarian theory is a consensualist theory that considers only the good and the bad consequences produced by an act as morally significant. Deterrence is a forward-looking punishment theory because it looks to forward criminality. They believe that punishment only as a means to an end and not as an end to itself. They also perceive punishment in terms of its ability to reduce crime and do not focus on the punishment that ought to be imposed on offenders. Critics of utilitarianism argue that because utilitarians see the aim of punishment as promoting public welfare and maximizing the happiness of all, means that the utilitarians are willing to punish the innocent to achieve that objective. Some of the issues with utilitarian theories is that they believe in punishing the innocent and states that if punishing a person is morally justified because it results in more utility than any alternative, then punishing the innocent is also morally permissible because it produces more overall utility than any available alternative. The right action that would be that which produced the highest utility and would therefore be morally acceptable to punish an innocent person in this situation. The difference between individual and general deterrence is that individual involves deterring someone who has already offended from reoffending and relies on offenders receiving a taste of the punishment they will receive if they reoffend and can be seen in short, sharp shock punishments. General involves dissuading potential offenders from offending at all by the way of punishment administered for a particular offense. And it also takes the form of legislation imposing penalties for specific offenses in the belief that those penalties will deter or prevent them from committing those offenses. Retribution is the theory that punishment is justified because it is deserved, and does not concern itself with the public good or with the safety or security of society or the moral improvement of the punishment. Retributivism justifies punishment on the basis that a person who knowingly breaks the law deserves to be punished. Retributivists argue that the retribution operates on a consensus model of right and wrong. It also follows the retributivist position that makes no allowance for social change or social conditions. Retributivism punishes the people for wrongful acts that they have performed and is not concerned about the consequences of a wrongful act or what might happen in the future. Punishment as a communicative practice asserts that punishment communicates to the criminal as a response appropriate to the crime committed. The element of communication requires that the person to whom the communication is directed must be an active participant in the process and must receive and respond publicly to the communication. And it also must be focused primarily on the offender being punished as a response to him or her and must be justified by his or her offenses. Punishment might be communicated in a formal conviction or guilt or through a system of harsh punishment, such as imprisonment, fines, or community service. The unfair advantage theory attempts to justify punishment as a retributive act is that an offender should be viewed as a person who has taken an unfair advantage of others in society by committing a crime and that imposing punishment restores fairness. To gain the benefits of non-interference, individuals must exercise self-restraint and not engage in acts that infringe the protected areas of the lives of others. The end result is that the unfair advantage theory of retribution does not justify punishment even when the law is broken, and the argument has also been challenged by those who argue that it distorts the nature of crime itself. The concept of desert conveys the idea that punishment for violating the law is morally permissible because offenders deserve to be punished, and it reflects a general feeling that criminals deserve to be punished, with the new thinking indicated that although there should continue to be treatment programs, a defendant would not ordinarily be incarcerated to receive treatment. The theory gains support as a reaction against the perceived unfairness of systems that favor treatment, which developed over the first half of the 20th century. Just Desert's proponents emphasize the notion that the punishment should be proportionate, that is, there should be a scale of punishments with the most serious being reserved for the most serious offenses. The rehabilitation theory of punishment holds that punishment should aim at the reformation of offenders and assist their transition from criminal to law-abiding citizens. The utilitarian theory argues that the punishment should have reformative or rehabilitative effects on the offender, and that proponents of rehabilitation and punishment argue that punishment should be tailored to fit the offender and his or her needs rather than fitting the offense. Rehabilitation theory regards crime as a symptom of a social disease and sees the aim of rehabilitation as curing that disease through treatment. Research has concluded that punishments depend less on philosophical arguments and more on the currents and movements in social thinking and in climates of tolerance and intolerance. Punishment is the product of social structure and cultural values. Sociological perspectives on punishment include the thinking of Emile Durkheim, Max Weber, the Marxist tradition, and the post-Marxist sociologists of punishment. Durkheim found that society has an objective reality apart from the individuals who compose it and argues that people behave according to social rules that form a culture for a particular society. He also examined aspects of social life in terms of the functions they performed in society and applied this approach to punishment by looking at the functions that punishment fulfills in maintaining social order. He developed 2 laws of penal evolution. Punishment is more intense the less developed a society is, and the more the central power within that society is of an absolute nature. And the other law is that he developed the notion of punishments having lesser intensity, arguing that imprisonment would become the punishment, replacing death or torture. Durkheim saw the function of punishment as promoting social solidarity through the affirmations of values and argues that the punishment importance lies in its expression of outrage on the offense. Weber identified 3 types of authority: the traditional, the charismatic, and the legal. The process of making rules by those given the right to rule as being the most appropriate form of rule for modern societies, and argues that system of laws might be rational or irrational. Marxist penologists have argued that punishment regulates the supply of labor. A key aspect of their view is that the principle of less eligibility. The argument is that the conditions offenders will experience in prison must be worse than anything they are likely to endure outside the prison to restrain the reserve army of labor from crime and to serve as a deterrent to the lowest social class. When changes in the use of imprisonment and other punishments are examined in historical context, other factors appear to have influenced their development. That's my outline for Chapter 6.